he was number 7.
You know, I don't actually give a I hate everyone. I hate everyone ranked in front of me.
So here's how two respected UFC lightweights went from friendly backstage conversations to one of the nastiest feuds we've ever witnessed. Personal attacks escalated beyond anything normal, crossing lines that left the entire MMA world stunned, and when you see exactly what triggered this explosion, you'll understand why their relationship can never be repaired. The MMA world has always embraced a certain level of mental warfare as part of building fights. Competitors regularly make threats, attack each other's fighting skills, and engage in psychological battles designed to create buzz and mess with their opponent's head before they even enter the cage. Look at examples everywhere. Conor McGregor's legendary trash talk that gets deep under people's skin, Chael Sonnen's wrestling-style promotional work, countless press conference blow-ups that have become as central to the sport as the actual fighting. But even in this environment where hostility is completely normal, certain boundaries exist. Unspoken rules that distinguish entertaining promotion from genuinely personal warfare that can damage people in ways that go far beyond any physical injury. January 9, 2026 at 8:12 a.m. GMT marked the moment Dan Hooker decided to fire back at Pimblett's shocking comments. What he chose to say crossed a boundary that many considered even worse than Pimblett's attack on his mother. Hooker went to X and posted video footage from their friendly November 2025 meeting at UFC Qatar, the same clip that had previously shown mutual respect between these fighters. But his caption carried a completely different energy. Those final words, "R.I.P. Ricky," with dove and tombstone emojis, turned regular social media drama into something much darker and more disturbing. Hooker was directly targeting Ricky Warwick, Pimblett's close friend who had taken his own life on July 21, 2022, just hours before Pimblett's weigh-in against Jordan Leavitt. This was the same friend whose death Pimblett had revealed in that emotional post-fight interview. The same tragedy that drove Pimblett's passionate work for men's mental health awareness. When someone loses a friend to suicide, the trauma affects entire circles of people who struggle to make sense of what happened. For Pimblett, who had been completely open about how devastating Ricky's death was to his life and career, seeing his friend's name thrown into a social media argument must have hit in a way that went far beyond normal trash talk. This wasn't just questioning his fighting skills or character. This was attacking his grief, his loss, the ongoing work he'd done to turn tragedy into something meaningful. Hooker's post pulled in around 6,500 likes, 212 reposts, 294 replies, and a massive 1.7 million views. The entire MMA community was watching this unfold, and people were already picking sides about who had gone too far in this rapidly growing conflict. But Hooker wasn't done. Just 17 minutes later at 8:29 a.m. GMT, he posted again with an even more direct threat. The phrase "on site" carries very specific meaning, a promise to engage in immediate physical confrontation the moment he encounters that person, with no talking, no negotiation, no hesitation. This wasn't promotional theater anymore. This was a direct threat of real violence that went way beyond sport. This second post exploded, even bigger, getting approximately 18,000 likes, 37.6 reposts, 4033 replies, and 1.3 million views. The beef had officially jumped from social media posturing to threats of actual physical violence. For hours, Pimblett stayed quiet while the MMA world debated who was more wrong with their typical passionate division. Social media platforms erupted with hot takes from fighters, fans, analysts, and everyone else weighing in with their perspective on who was more responsible for this complete breakdown. Timeline became war zones as supporters of each fighter defended their guy while attacking the other, creating comment threads that stretched into hundreds of responses filled with anger and accusations. Some people argued that bringing up a friend who died by suicide, especially considering Pimblett's advocacy work and the emotional weight that still surrounded this tragedy, was the lowest possible attack, something so sacred that no provocation could justify crossing that line. They pointed to everything Pimblett had done since Ricky's death, the money raised for mental health organizations, the conversations he'd helped start about male suicide prevention. They argued that using this tragedy for social media beef showed a level of cruelness that went way beyond ordinary fighter trash talk. Finally, at 3:02 p.m. GMT, Pimblett broke his silence with a response that accepted Hooker's challenge while condemning his approach. In this single response, Pimblett did several things at once. He referenced Hooker's previous comments about hating fighters ranked above him, turning that casual conversation into ammunition for their current war. Pimblett held the number 5 ranking in the UFC lightweight division at this time, while Hooker had dropped to around number 8 or 9 following his submission loss to Zargian. He tried to frame his original comment as a hypothetical joke about grappling skills, which many people felt seriously downplayed how offensive his remarks actually were. Most importantly, he directly called out Hooker for referencing his dead friend, calling it the lowest of the low. Pimblett's response got around 3,100 likes, 73 reposts, 336 replies, and 29,000 views. With that final exchange, the confrontation seemed to end. Neither fighter posted anything else as the evening went on, leaving the MMA community to process what they just witnessed. The timing made this even more complicated. Pimblett was just 15 days away from the biggest fight of his career, an interim UFC lightweight title bout against Justin Gaethje at UFC 324 on January 24, 2026. This represented Pimblett's first real championship opportunity. Meanwhile, Hooker was scheduled to face Benoit Zarkian at UFC 325 on January 31, 2026. Both men had major professional commitments coming up immediately, yet neither seemed willing to step back from this personal war. In the brutal theater of mixed martial arts, where athletes regularly beat each other unconscious for millions of viewers, there exists an unwritten code, a set of invisible boundaries that even the most savage competitors instinctively understand should never be violated. These boundaries are rarely talked about openly, yet every participant in the violent world of professional fighting recognizes they exist. On January 9th, 2026, two of the UFC's most compelling lightweight contenders didn't just cross that line, they completely destroyed it, leaving nothing but destruction and the burning remains of what many believed was a genuine friendship built through shared competition. The story of Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker's explosive social media war represents one of the most dramatic and deeply personal conflicts to emerge in recent UFC history. A confrontation involving references to dead friends, mothers, and the type of verbal warfare that makes regular trash talk look like polite conversation. But to really understand how massive what happened between these two warriors was, we need to examine the complex web of events that led to this catastrophic breakdown in their relationship. We need to understand exactly who these men are and what drives them to compete at the highest level of combat sports. Paddy the Baddy Pimblett stands as one of the most polarizing figures in modern mixed martial arts. A fighter whose very presence seems designed to create extreme reactions from people across the sporting world. Born January 3rd, 1995 in Liverpool, England, this charismatic scouser has built an empire on his undeniable fighting skills, infectious personality, and willingness to speak his mind regardless of what consequences that honesty might bring. At just 31 years old, Pimblett has put together an impressive professional record of 23 wins against only 3 losses, with his submission skills accounting for 10 of those victories and his improving striking adding another 7 knockout finishes to his resume. But maybe more impressive than these numbers is his perfect record inside the UFC's octagon, a flawless 7-0 run that has launched him from regional circuit favorite to one of the most discussed fighters on the planet. His path to UFC stardom started long before his promotional debut in 2021, going back through years of development in the competitive world of European mixed martial arts. As the former Cage Warriors featherweight champion, Pimblett dominated the European MMA scene with a combination of technical grappling and an almost supernatural ability to create excitement wherever he competed. His UFC debut against Luigi Vendramini ended spectacularly with a TKO finish that earned him Performance of the Night honors, and announced to the MMA world that a new star had landed on the sport's biggest stage. Following victories over Jordan Leavitt, Jared Gordon, Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green, and most notably Michael Chandler in 2025, a knockout that represented his most impressive achievement yet, established Pimblett as a serious threat in the lightweight division. But Pimblett's career story goes far beyond wins and losses, knockouts and submissions. In July 2022, following his submission victory over Jordan Leavitt at UFC London, Pimblett revealed to the world that he had learned of his close friend Ricky's suicide just hours before the weigh-ins. In one of the most emotionally powerful post-fight interviews in UFC history, with tears running down his face and his voice cracking with grief, Pimblett used his platform to deliver a passionate message about men's mental health awareness. He said there's a stigma in this world that men can't talk about their feelings, and begged anyone thinking about such a devastating decision to please speak to someone, anyone, about their struggles. The weight of what Pimblett had carried into that fight was almost impossible for observers to comprehend. Here was a man who had learned of his best friend's death just hours before he needed to make weight for a professional fight, who had somehow pushed that devastating grief aside long enough to step into the octagon and secure a submission victory, and who had then chosen to use his moment of triumph to advocate for others who might be suffering in silence. The authenticity of his emotion was undeniable. This wasn't promotional theater, but genuine human vulnerability displayed before millions of viewers. That moment went beyond sport entirely, transforming Pimblett from simply a talented fighter into a genuine advocate for mental health awareness, a cause he has supported consistently ever since. His work has included supporting charities like James's Place in his beloved Liverpool, an organization dedicated to providing professional help to men experiencing suicidal crisis. He has spoken repeatedly in interviews about the importance of breaking down barriers that prevent men from seeking help, about the toxic masculinity that convinces men they must suffer alone, and about his determination to honor Ricky's memory by preventing others from making the same tragic choice. The vulnerability Pimblett showed in that post-fight interview earned him respect from parts of the sporting world that had previously written him off as just a loudmouthed regional fighter. On the other side of this brewing conflict stands Dan the Hangman Hooker, a 35-year-old New Zealand veteran whose journey through the UFC ranks reads like a testament to human resilience, determination, and the relentless will to compete at the highest level despite setbacks that would have broken lesser competitors. Born February 13, 1990 in Auckland, Hooker brings a wealth of experience to every fight, having built a professional record of 24 victories against 13 defeats throughout his lengthy career. Standing 6 feet tall with an impressive 75-inch reach that lets him control distance and pick apart opponents from range. Hooker's kickboxing background, he claimed the king in the ring middleweight championship before switching to MMA, makes him a dangerous striker who has shared the octagon with virtually every significant lightweight contender of the modern era. Hooker's UFC career, spanning over a decade since his 2014 debut, represents the classic journey of a true warrior. While his roughly 14-9 UFC record may not shine with the same undefeated polish as Pimblett's perfect run, the level of opposition he has faced tells a much more compelling story. His legendary 5-round war with Dustin Poirier in 2020 remains one of the greatest lightweight battles ever witnessed, a brutal showcase of heart and skill that earned both men eternal respect from the MMA community. Though Hooker ultimately lost that fight, the performance showed his willingness to stand and trade with the division's elite, absorbing devastating punishment while continuing to fire back with his own combinations. His split decision victory over Paul Felder, a fight of the night classic that saw both men give everything they had over 5 grueling rounds, and his victory over Mateusz Gamrot in 2024 cemented his reputation as someone who refuses to be an easy night for anyone. Training out of the legendary City Kickboxing Gym in Auckland alongside Israel Adesanya and other elite fighters, Hooker has developed a striking game that combines technical precision with genuine knockout power. His long reach allows him to control distance and pick apart opponents from the outside, while his toughness enables him to survive moments when that distance gets closed. Yet his recent submission loss to Arman Dzarukian at UFC Qatar in November 2025 had exposed ongoing weaknesses in his grappling defense, vulnerabilities that would soon become the subject of cruel mockery from an unexpected source. Before January 2026, the relationship between these two men appeared to be nothing but cordial, friendly even, if the available evidence could be trusted. At UFC Qatar in November 2025, where Hooker was fighting against Arman Dzarukian, the two fighters crossed paths backstage during the weigh-ins. Pimblett was in Qatar to corner a teammate, and the two lightweights found themselves near each other during the pre-fight activities. Video footage from that meeting shows them chatting pleasantly, laughing together, showing none of the hostility that would soon destroy their relationship. The body language was relaxed, the conversation seemed genuine, and anyone watching the interaction would have had no reason to suspect that these two men had any bad feelings toward each other. While defending Gaethje's age, the American was 37 at the time, Pimblett drew a comparison to Hooker, stating with his characteristic Liverpool bluntness that people were saying Justin Gaethje was old, but that he was only 2 years older than Dan Hooker. Then came the comment that started the firestorm. A vulgar, crude remark suggesting that Dan Hooker's grappling skills were so terrible that he couldn't even defend his own mother in a hypothetical assault scenario. The exact wording was crude enough to mock Hooker's grappling defense, while simultaneously involving his mother in an extreme and offensive way. The clip spread across social media platforms like wildfire, shared and reshared by accounts like ChamparDS on X, analyzed and debated by fans and analysts alike. For many observers, Pimblett's comment represented a major escalation from typical fight promotion banter. Involving an opponent's mother in such a scenario crossed a line that many felt should remain untouchable. In the immediate aftermath of this explosive social media confrontation, the UFC and its leadership remained notably silent. Dana White, the promotion's president and typically a reliable source for commentary on fighter controversies, offered no public statements about the Pimblett-Hooker feud. This silence could be interpreted several ways. Maybe the UFC viewed the conflict as a personal matter between two adult competitors, or perhaps they recognized that any official commentary might only add fuel to an already burning fire. Alternatively, the promotion might have been quietly happy with the attention this beef was creating for two fighters with major high-profile bouts coming up. The contrast between this sudden hatred and their cordial November 2025 interaction made the feud even more shocking to observers who had witnessed their friendly backstage exchange at UFC Qatar. Hooker's decision to share that footage alongside his initial attack served as pointed commentary on what he saw as Pimblett's two-faced behavior, friendly in person but disparaging when speaking to media outlets, without Hooker present to respond. Media coverage of the incident was extensive, with outlets including MMA Fighting, Low Kick MMA, JJPN.com, and others providing detailed breakdowns of the exchange. Most coverage emphasized the shock value of the confrontation, while noting its isolated nature. This was a single explosive exchange rather than an ongoing rivalry with deep historical roots. The speed with which the relationship had deteriorated from friendly to nuclear was itself a story. The reaction from the MMA community was predictably split, with passionate arguments emerging on both sides. Those who sided with Pimblett pointed to the sacred nature of his friend's memory and the inappropriateness of weaponizing a suicide for social media engagement. They argued that regardless of what Pimblett had said about Hooker's mother, however crude or offensive, some subjects should remain off limits, and that Hooker's invocation of Ricky's death revealed a fundamental lack of decency that no provocation could excuse. Supporters of Hooker argued that Pimblett had started the personal attacks by involving Hooker's mother in such a crude and offensive hypothetical scenario, and that he had no right to claim victim status after making comments designed to humiliate and demean. They argued that Pimblett's subsequent defense of his comments as merely a hypothetical joke showed a fundamental misunderstanding of why his original statement was so objectionable. The career paths of both fighters provide important context for understanding why this conflict erupted with such intensity. Pimblett, at 31 years old with his perfect 7-0 UFC record, represents the future of the lightweight division. His rise has been almost impossibly steep, from regional circuit champion to UFC contender to interim title challenger in just a few short years. His knockout victory over Michael Chandler in 2025 silenced many doubters and established him as a legitimate threat to anyone in the division. Hooker represents something different, the battle-tested veteran whose best days may or may not be behind him. At 35 years old, with a career record that includes both brilliant victories and crushing defeats, Hooker occupies the challenging middle ground between contendership and gatekeeping. His recent loss to Zarukian highlighted ongoing vulnerabilities in his grappling defense, the very vulnerabilities that Pimblett chose to mock in his original interview. These different career trajectories may explain some of the intensity behind their conflict. Pimblett, rising rapidly toward a title shot with the confidence of a fighter who has never tasted defeat in the UFC, perhaps felt emboldened to dismiss a veteran he saw as fading from relevance. The security of his position in the rankings combined with his upcoming title opportunity may have created a sense of invincibility that showed up in reckless trash talk aimed at someone who posed no immediate threat to his career path. Hooker, watching a younger fighter jump ahead of him in the rankings while simultaneously mocking his abilities in the most offensive terms possible, may have felt a particular sting that motivated his extreme response. The psychology of professional fighting is complex, involving ego, pride, financial pressure, and the knowledge that every performance could be the one that defines or destroys a career. For a veteran like Hooker, seeing a relative newcomer dismiss decades of work with a crude joke about his mother may have triggered something primal, a need to wound as deeply as he had been wounded, regardless of the consequences. No official fight between Pimblett and Hooker has been announced, and given their respective scheduled bouts in late January 2026, such a matchup couldn't happen until spring at the earliest. However, the on-site challenge issued by Hooker and accepted by Pimblett suggests that any future meeting between these fighters could potentially escalate beyond verbal conflict. The UFC may eventually seek to capitalize on this bad blood by booking them against each other. Such a fight would carry significant promotional weight. The brash young star against the respected veteran, the mental health advocate against the man who invoked his friend's death. The promotional possibilities are endless, even if the ethical implications of profiting from such deeply personal animosity remain troubling. From a matchmaking perspective, a Pimblett-Hooker fight makes considerable sense beyond the narrative elements. Both men compete in the same division, occupy similar positions in the rankings, and possess styles that could produce an entertaining contest. Pimblett's grappling prowess against Hooker's striking would create a classic stylistic clash, while both men's willingness to engage and their histories of producing exciting fights suggest a matchup that would deliver entertainment value regardless of the personal animosity underlying it. The UFC has shown repeatedly that it views genuine fighter animosity as a promotional asset rather than a problem to be managed. The most successful pay-per-views often feature fighters who genuinely despise each other, whose desire to inflict damage extends beyond professional obligation into personal vendetta. A Pimblett-Hooker fight would fit perfectly into this promotional model, offering the kind of authentic bad blood that can't be manufactured through press conference theatrics alone. However, the promotion must also consider potential downsides of such a booking. The on-site threats exchanged between both fighters raise legitimate concerns about what might happen at press conferences, weigh-ins, or other promotional events leading up to a potential fight. While controlled confrontations can generate buzz and sell tickets, genuinely hostile encounters can damage the promotion's reputation and create legal liabilities. The line between promotional theater and genuine danger can be difficult to identify, and the UFC would need to carefully manage any future interactions between these two combatants. For now, both fighters must focus on their immediate challenges. Pimblett must channel whatever emotions this conflict has stirred into his preparation for Justin Gaethje, a fight that could establish him as a legitimate champion or expose him as elevated beyond his actual skill level. Hooker must similarly compartmentalize his anger while preparing for Benoit Sarakian, a fight that could reignite his title ambitions or continue his slide toward veteran gatekeeper status. The MMA community will be watching both fights with heightened interest, analyzing not just the technical performances but also the psychological states of both combatants. Did this conflict provide Pimblett with extra motivation and additional chip on his shoulder that will fuel a career-best performance against Gaethje, or did it distract him from his preparations, introducing emotional turbulence into a camp that should have been focused entirely on the interim title? Did Hooker's aggressive response suggest a fighter who had lost emotional control, allowing anger to override judgment in ways that might carry over into his performance? Or did it reveal a warrior who refuses to be disrespected, channeling his frustration into focused aggression? These questions will find their answers in the octagon, where the truth of a fighter's character ultimately reveals itself through action rather than words. The cage has a way of stripping away pretense, of exposing both strengths and weaknesses that words can hide, and both Pimblett and Hooker will face opponents capable of testing every aspect of their preparation, their skill, and their mental fortitude. But regardless of how their upcoming fights unfold, the events of January 9th, 2026 have permanently changed the relationship between Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker. What was once cordial is now hostile. What was once friendly is now bitter enmity. And the invocation of a dead friend's memory has ensured that this conflict will carry wounds that may never fully heal. In the brutal world of professional fighting, where physical violence is the currency of success, it's perhaps ironic that the deepest cuts often come from words rather than fists. Pimblett's crude hypothetical about Hooker's mother was undeniably offensive, a gratuitous insult that served no purpose beyond provocation, but Hooker's decision to respond by invoking Ricky to weaponize a friend's suicide for social media clout represented a different category of transgression entirely. Whether the MMA world has witnessed the beginning of a prolonged rivalry or merely a single explosive incident remains to be seen. Some fighter beefs burn hot briefly before cooling into mutual indifference. Others simmer for years before being resolved through cage competition. The Pimblett-Hooker conflict could follow either path, depending on factors that neither fighter fully controls, whether the UFC chooses to book them against each other, whether they cross paths at future events, and whether time allows for any healing of the wounds inflicted on that fateful January day.